through some things, and especially I want to start with the last record that I also talked with Steve about it, this Quiet Revolution thing.
Yeah.
I was completely surprised that this is a Ben Allison record. I mean, maybe not for you, but for me as a listener, you know, because like, first of all, it's drummerless.
Right.
Which for me was like, okay.
Heretical.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds amazing, man. Seriously, it's so beautiful, but just that's the first one. And then you play like Jim Hall tunes and like my favorite ones, like those Waltz New and all those cool stuff, like all across the city. And I wanted to ask you, how did you come to the idea to actually to do this project first?
Well, it's very much a collaborative band. I mean, that's the thing that's I have to say out front. It's an idea that we came to organically. Steve and I, as you know, based on your other interview with Steve and to my records and Steve's records over the years, we have a long time working relationship. We've done so many different projects together. And we were both talking about our mutual love and respect for Jim Hall as a guitarist, but also as a composer, like the kind of tunes that he wrote. And so we started just talking about putting something together and pitched the idea to one of my longtime friends, Ted Nash, who's an incredible reed player of, with whom I've collaborated for many years. Actually, the very first record and band and tour that I did was Ted's band back in the early 90s.
Oh, wow.
So we have a very long working relationship. And so we just decided to get together and play. Just not with any goal in mind, but just other than to delve into this kind of music, to feel what it feels like to be in a drummerless situation, which, as you've alluded to, for me is different because I'm so kind of groove oriented and drum and bass oriented in my music. But I wanted to do that because it sonically it leaves a lot of room. As soon as you take, I'm all about the drums, but as soon as you take the drums out of the mix, it leaves a lot of sonic space. And that was it. It was just rented a rehearsal room and got together and played, and it just was so fun and so interactive, and for me very reminiscent of when I first came to New York City in the 1980s. There was duo gigs, trio gigs, especially duo gigs, bass and another instrument, bass and piano, bass and guitar was a thing. I mean, there were many gigs like that, different venues all over town, Zinno's, Knickerbocker's, which is still around, Bradley's.
Oh, Bradley's,
places in my neighborhood. I live in Greenwich Village, so places in my neighborhood that had bass and another instrument playing together. That was a very common thing that you would see. And as a bass player, those were the gigs.
Exactly.
And that's where I would go out and hear Ron Carter and Red Mitchell and Ray Drummond and just so many different bass players who are incredible musicians, and how they worked in a duo setting.
But did you see then Ron Carter with Jim Hall also, or?
Yeah. Oh,
really?
yeah.
Like in these small clubs?
Yeah.
Really?
My very first day in New York City, I went to New York University, NYU, and the very first day that I was here, I walked 1 block from the dorm that I was living in to a place called Knickerbocker, which is still around, and it was playing in the restaurant was Ron Carter, and I believe it was Kenny Barron.
Oh, wow.
Might have been Steve Kuhn, but I think Kenny Barron.
Wow.
And there's a little nook where there's a little carve out where there are 2 seats, and you can, if you get those seats, you can sit right there, maybe 3 feet away.
Oh, wow.
It's very close. It's very close. It's divided by a metal railing, so there's a space there. But you can sit there and watch and listen in the most intimate way to musicians who you idolize.
That's amazing.
This was for a young musician. This is like
Dream come true.
It's a dream come true, right? I mean, you don't
definitely.
If you're a rock musician and you go to hear, whatever, Eddie Van Halen, or
whoever,
whoever, Clapton, and you're sitting right there 2 feet away from them and you're watching them do what they do, that's an education.
Yeah.
So I got to sit right next to Ron Carter and watch. That's typical of New York in the time. And so part of this project for me was, revisiting what it feels like to be in a very intimate duo or trio-like setting without drums.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's the idea.
But did you guys, for the first session, already bring those tunes by Jim Hall, or did you just say, okay, let's first jam a little on standards or something? Or
No. We focused immediately on Jim's tunes and also Jimmy Giuffre.
Giuffre's, I love the trios, that's
right. So the Giuffre stuff from the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
His concept was drummerless trios. So he would put these bands together without drums.
Yeah.
With the idea of stretching it out and leaving some space. And and Jim Hall was in some of those.
Yeah.
And many different musicians over the years. The ones that I would see were, when I came to New York, it was often branded as the Paul Bley Trio.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it was the same band. It was the same group. It was Paul Bley and either Gary Peacock, who just passed,
or Steve, right? Swallow.
Or Steve Swallow.
Yeah.
And Jimmy Giuffre.
Yeah.
Playing often soprano, sometimes clarinet, and very occasionally tenor. He played every reed, like Ted.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, and they used to play at Sweet Basil's all the time, which is a club down on 7th Avenue, and I never missed a set. I was there every night.
Oh, really?
Very improvisational. Oh yeah. Yeah, because when as much as I love drums, and I've devoted my career to playing with incredible drummers, there's something about the space when you take the drums out that is really special.
It's different, yeah. But then, did you guys have many rehearsals, or was this a jam thing? Also when you recorded it, before recording it, did you play a couple of times those tunes and kind of left it fresh, or?
We had played together a number of times. It's the kind of thing that we're each, I'm a band leader in my own right.
Yeah, sure.
A band leader in his own right. Steve's working on his projects, and we would be doing that most of the time, and then every once in a while would convene for a particular concert. And we had done a number of short tours and some really interesting concerts.
With this trio?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
By the time we recorded, we had.
Wow.
We had played, I don't know, so many different, I'm just flashing back now to gigs that we did. We played at this incredible concert hall in Salt Lake City. It was very acoustically beautiful, very well balanced. And that's when the idea of recording this came into my mind.
Yeah.
It's this big old hall, I can't remember. I think it's called the Capitol Theater. And also in Stamford, Connecticut, we played at this beautiful theater that had these sonics. So I was thinking a lot about the sonics of it.
Sure.
But, it'd be the kind of thing where we would play and then we wouldn't do anything with that project for 6 months or so.
Yeah.
So this went on for a number of years.
Oh, super.
And when his name is Allan, a pianist, a great, fine pianist who has his own label called Nouvelle Records. Mm-hmm. And he approached me about doing a project. And
I wanted to ask you about that because it's not on your Sonic camera record, so I was also surprised to see that. I was like, from you, okay, interesting.
Yeah, well, actually, that record is now on Sonic Camera Records as well.
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah, that it's kind of. But
that's the second part of that story. So first, Allan contacted me about doing the record, and we did. I chose that because I felt it would be good for that label. It's a vinyl-only label. It's all about kind of the sonics of the experience, and just it seemed like a good project to do it. And but the nature of their deals is that they release the records on vinyl, and then after a number of years, in my case 2 years, the rights to the album revert to the artist, which is a very cool model.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
It's a very cool model, yeah.
Oh, that's great.
And then you can do what you want. So what I did is I took that back.
Yeah.
remixed it and then released it again on my label.
Yeah. Ah, okay.
On a camera. So that's how that happened.
Just want to ask you that then reprise to this. Like, I was surprised yesterday. I listened out some music. I have like, I think almost all your albums, but not these two last ones. So I went yesterday to one of the streaming platforms, like checked, and I was surprised that the same trio did this like West Side Story songs.
Yeah.
So, but this is then Tad's name is on the first place. But was this the same recording session or was it a different recording session?
Different recording session. So this is what I was saying. This project is not the Ben Allison trio.
Yeah, I know.
Very much a cooperative project. So that's what you have to understand, right?
Yeah,
so the second version was Ted then taking the reins and saying, okay, I'd like to take this idea and try our hand at these compositions. And he had a tour that he had put together in Cuba. So the three of us went down to Cuba.
Seriously? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was just really interesting and so fun. And he wanted to focus on this music from West Side Story, which is very iconic.
Yeah.
But also complicated music. They're not simple tunes with normal short forms for the large part. There's lots of orchestrations and counter melodies. And so the challenge was, how do you condense that down into three musicians?
Yeah.
In an improvisational setting, right? So
no, it sounds beautiful. Also, the sound, I listened to it yesterday. I was like, damn, really good.
That record we really did without much rehearsal or forethought. That was
but it sounds like those Jimmy Juffer records, kind of. It has this intimate thingy, and I think that's important to capture, right? Yeah. So I guess it's Steve's turn next one, right? To take the lead.
That's what. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's up to Steve to make the next one.
Okay, that's good, man.
The baton has been passed.
Yeah, exactly.
Steve.
Yeah, but speaking of Steve, how was it like for you to record the last album by Steve, Blue Has a Range? I mean, when I talked to Steve, we talked about that record a lot. I love it. It's such a nice record. I mean, especially speaking to you now as a bass player. I mean, you've played with Steve for a long time, but how was it for you to play like with Brian Blade on those tunes? I mean, he's like, one of my giant heroes of ever. So how was that like for you?
It was easy.
Oh, wow. That's, wow. Okay.
And fun. I mean, I know those are two simple words, but.
But you never played with him before, right? With Brian?
No.
Oh, wow.
No. But it's sometimes playing with musicians is a struggle. It's a conversation that you're having in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like any conversation, especially with somebody who you don't know very well, it can either go well or it can not go well.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it really comes down to the personality of the person you're speaking with and how it's feeling in that day. And my feeling playing with Brian, I mean, I too admire him greatly. I mean, he's an incredible musician, so I had no fear coming in. I just knew it was going to be an easy conversation, but it's just, when you're in the moment in the recording session, you don't know exactly how it's going to go. And this is also new music. I mean, Steve wrote a bunch of new tunes for us, so it's kind of untested in a way. It's not like we've been out on the road for 6 months.
Yeah, that's what I told Steve. You
figured it out.
You guys sound like really, really tight.
Well, it's a combination of two things. One, the material is written in such a way that is well suited for that kind of thing. It wasn't overly complex, where everybody was struggling really hard to figure it out. They were great conversation starters, so that they were constructed in a way that were easy in one way to understand, but also provocative for a conversation. They gave you pieces of ideas that you could then grab onto and then flesh out. And as a composer, I mean, that's something that I've always tried to do with my music, and I know Steve does, is try to create tunes that you can wrap your mind around without too much struggle, but also give you enough subject matter to kind of absorb and then create something out of. If it's too bland of a composition, then there's too much pressure on the improviser to create something out of nothing, which can be fun, but that's a harder thing to do. Or if they're on the other end of the spectrum, if they're too overly proscribed, is that a word? If they're organized too heavily, or if they have too much information,
too arranged or somehow,
too arranged, or there's too much that you have to try to distill and make something out of, then it inhibits conversation. And Steve's tunes are like that perfect sweet spot as an improviser and as a musician for us to just good ideas that we can then take and make something out of. And then so that was one thing. And then the second thing is, Brian and John.
Yeah, they're incredible. They've played together for 20 years, right? Or more.
They have a strong connection. And then Steve and I have a strong connection. And then Steve has a pretty strong connection with those two.
Yeah.
So his idea was to bring us all together. And his guess was that this is going to be a pretty easy and fun conversation.
Yeah, yeah. And, it sounds like it. Yeah, it's really, really, really cool. I mean,
yeah, he was right.
Yeah. So you guys sound amazing. So speaking of Steve, I mean, like, when did you guys meet first? Like, since I mean, you mentioned it already. You played with so many guys for such a long time. I checked out your records, and I was like, yeah, you kind of had the same names. Like, I mean, I see your career in two phases. I'll let you know why. But when did you first meet Steve? I mean, I'm really curious in that. How did you guys meet or start playing together, actually?
I first met Steve playing at a club in New York City called the Jazz Standard. Mm-hmm. Back in, I'm going to say 2005, maybe somewhere around there. Yeah, so it was 15 years ago or so. I was another good friend of mine, a collaborator with whom I've worked many times, is a trumpet player and arranger named Stephen Bernstein. Yeah. And he has a project that's been ongoing. I mean, I think I can tell you when we started. We started New Year's Eve 2000. It's the Millennial Territory Orchestra.
Oh, yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So exactly, it'll be 21 years ago. And so we played, Stephen had arranged a bunch of music for this Robert Altman film called Kansas City, which incorporated the Kansas City music. Yeah. And so we had been playing some of that stuff, and the regular guitarist could not make it, and I don't know how Stephen Bernstein found Steve Cardenas, invited him to sit in, and we were playing one tune, and somewhere along in the middle of it, Steve played a George Harrison lick.
Really? Oh, wow. And
I just felt like, holy shit, first of all, George Harrison. Secondly, like, how does somebody find a way to incorporate George Harrison into a tune from 1924, a Tiny Parnham tune from 1924. And it was just very creative, and I really dug his sound and his approach to guitar. It doesn't have a lot of, he doesn't have racks of effects. It's very honest and just straight ahead. Yeah. And I really appreciate that. And we struck up a conversation at the bar, and I had this idea in my mind of creating a new project with bass, guitar, trumpets, and drums. And I just thought that he's kind of like the sound I was looking for, you know what I mean? You're thinking as a composer and a band leader, like, what's the next sound that you want? And I'd had this sound for a number of years, and I wanted to change it up. And
that's what I wanted to ask you. Because that's how I see your, like, pre-Steve and post-Steve. Because I mean, pre-guitar or post-guitar. Because those the first 6-7 records are without guitar, and it's a completely. I mean, it's your vibe, but for me at least as a listener, it's a different vibe than after you started introducing guitars in your music. I mean, how did, for you as a composer, this change, let's say, introducing Steve or let's say guitar into compositions? What does this bring to you? I mean, you had piano before, but guitar is a different animal in a way. I mean,
it is a different animal. It kind of refers back to my roots. I mean, I grew up in a northeastern American city called New Haven.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of a hip town in a way. I mean, at the time I hated it because I was a teenager and I hated everything. But in retrospect, New Haven's kind of hip. I mean, it's where Yale University is. So there's this kind of, there are really three worlds. There's Yale University, which is this whole universe unto itself.
Yeah.
Then there's New Haven as a city, which is extremely diverse, but also fairly segregated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I was growing up, the neighborhoods were very separate.
Oh.
And something that I wanted to try to do was to reach outside of my scene and connect with other people. And I found that I could do that through music. So just as a sidebar, my first professional experiences were playing in salsa bands.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah, because that was like, I mean, first of all, I loved the music, and secondly, there were a lot of salsa bands, and one could, as a young musician, get gigs playing in bands because they were busy. Every weekend, you'd have a wedding, you'd have a club, you'd have a dance party, you'd have something to do. And when I say playing at a club, what I mean is you're playing a bass line, and there are 300 people dancing to it. So like if you fuck up the beat, 600 people are going to step on the other person's toes, and they're all going to be angry with you.
That's cool.
So, if you're 15 years old and you're trying to figure out how to play, that's like a kind of an experience. You better get it right. And I took it seriously. And most of the musicians, by the way, were older people. So I was the young guy in the band, but it allowed me to have an experience of playing music that had a kind of a social component. There was a point to it. It wasn't just music you put on a record player and listened to with your headphones by yourself. It was music that people created in the room, in the moment, that had a purpose.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Right. So that's really different than than a lot of other stuff. So for me, that was pivotal. And New Haven was one of those. It was a town that allowed that scene was happening. So for me, that was important.
Yeah, no, but going back to, for you as a composer, let's say, how do you approach now your music after you added the guitar, right? I mean, like, in general, I wanted to ask you, like, because for me, you're like one of the best composers out there. Like, your tunes always have a sense, they have a story. How do you compose? Like, sometimes I get a feeling you actually write for the people who are in the band. So, I know Brandon Seabrook or Steve and all these guys, and kind of how Brandon plays and how Steve plays. Yeah. Do you keep that in mind when you write music, or do you write music just like, okay, I'll write now a song? Or
yes, I do think about the person. Like Duke Ellington did. Yeah. He would write a tune, and it's like Johnny Hodges plays that melody.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or Strayhorn writes a melody, and Johnny Hodges plays that melody, and that's who plays it.
Yeah.
Ornette wrote these incredible melodies, but when he found Don Cherry, he found a kindred spirit who understood how to play them. Yeah. And not everybody can play those melodies the way Don played those melodies. And understanding, I'm not saying Ornette was writing for Don, but what I'm saying is that people come together around music, usually kind of quite by chance and organically, but then as composers, I think it's common and a good thing when people write with other people in mind.
Yeah.
Like try to write music that somehow takes advantage, or I don't know what's the right word, but incorporates the special things that those musicians do.
Yeah. I mean, I agree completely. Like, it's just, I spoke to some musicians, and they were like, yeah, sometimes I just write music. I cannot do that. I mean, I can, obviously, from a technical standpoint, but just from this emotional, if you have, I don't know, I played with Tony Malaby recently, and, I know how he sounds, and I know what will be really good, so I really want to write music like that. So that's what I hear with you as well, that you kind of get this always like, bam, okay.
Well, that usually comes from playing with somebody, hearing kind of where they're coming from, and then that, to to me, that's usually the inspiration to create something new. I mean, I started playing with Jeremy Pelt about 5 years ago or so. I played in his band. We played in a cooperative project, some other kind of concerts, like, I don't know, whatever, some kind of band that was put together by a producer. Really cool, but people who might not otherwise congregate. Man, his playing, I loved it. I love the way he phrases stuff. I love his tone. I love his sensibility, kind of where he's coming from musically. It was like we were talking about before, playing with him is like that easy conversation.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know if it's because we share a lot of the same influences or we love the same sort of stuff, or we just, for whatever reason, I can't explain it.
Yeah, sure.
I can relate to his playing deeply. I mean, I think he's a great player, in my opinion. To my ears,
he is. He's really a good player.
Somebody who I really want to play with, right? Yeah. So when I started playing with him in his band and in other projects, I thought, man, I want to do a record now that kind of embraces what I hear in his playing.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah.
And that's where the record Layers of the City came from. It was just, that was a big part of it, was trying to figure out what he does that's special, or what I hear in him, and write tunes around it. I've never told him this, so he may not know this, but that's actually where a lot of the music came from.
That's so cool.
Yeah, he I don't know if he felt the same way when he played it, but that's what I hear. And as a composer, that's all you can do. You can write tunes that reflect what you're hearing in your your collaborators.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's. But how do you write? Like, I mean, lots of your music is based. I mean, especially earlier stuff maybe for me, like on grooves. But do you write on bass or on piano or just?
Yeah, it depends.
Always depends, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do like the idea of trying to start from different vantage points.
Oh, okay.
Because I think most of the composers in the audience will relate to this. It's often the case that you start on the instrument that you play and you do kind of the things that you normally do. And if you sit down kind of with a blank piece of paper in front of you, metaphorically, and say, okay, I'm going to write a new tune, a lot of times what comes out is the stuff you kind of already know. Yeah. And because that's
definitely true.
That's what you hear. So for me, I recognized that early on. I was writing tunes that sounded kind of the same, or at least I felt like they sounded the same. They weren't going anywhere, and so I specifically tried to pull away and tried to write tunes on instruments that I don't play, or started to think about ways to start tunes that were different from how I had done it before.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I might have early on started with a melody in my mind that I would then try to add a harmony to, or a series of harmonic changes or harmonic progression that I would then try to add a melody on.
Oh yeah, okay.
I started to think, well, what if I start just with the timbre of something, just the way an instrument sounds?
Yeah,
I don't know what the melody is going to be.
Yeah.
I don't know what the chords are going to be. I don't know what the melody is going to be, but I know that it's going to involve a trumpet with a plunger.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah.
Or some kind of different bass technique that has a different sort of sound. That's the beginning of it.
Yeah.
And lay that down, maybe record it or maybe think about it in my mind, get together with musicians and just mess around and record a bunch of stuff. And then take those fragments and then try to use those as the starting points of compositions. So I kind of got into thinking about it that way. It was a little bit different than the way I had been doing it, with just writing a melody and then trying to harmonize it, or writing a harmony and then trying to put a melody on the top. I would try to come from a different starting points. And then everything else, the stuff that I know and the stuff that I like and my aesthetics and what I think sounds good would naturally flow from that first moment. But the first moment is what sets it up, because that sets you on a path. And
this is so important, man. Seriously,
yeah,
because for me it's the same. Like if I pick up a guitar, I think especially now after some time of doing this, I think like everything I play sounds the same.
yeah,
Or you start a composition, it's like, shit, I played this voicing or chord, or it's, so I think it's good. Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't know, I'm not a good, I play piano, like really, yikes. But I guess it's a good idea to
yeah, me
start
too.
like with a fifth, on a piano. Let's see what happens, or
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, that's a
however you
good,
start.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good
I
one.
think you're right. We're limited by our technique, but I think a lot of it is. I feel I set a goal for myself early on that I wanted each one of my tunes, whatever I wrote,
Mhm.
to be in some way different. They have to be different. They can't just be the
Yeah,
same tune every time.
yeah.
When I listen back now, I'm in the process of remixing all of my albums that I did for Palmetto. I did 10
Palmetto,
records
yeah,
for them.
yeah.
Yeah, and they all reverted to me, and I have the rights to them. So I've been pulling them apart and then putting them back together.
So you have the
And
individual tracks and everything?
oh yeah, I have the session files.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? Oh, wow, how cool. Wow. That's
yeah.
amazing. Okay.
Well, that's something I learned from Andrew Hill, but that's another story.
Okay.
Um, uh, so putting this all back together and thinking about how these tunes were constructed, I think it's for me, it's important to make sure that you're not repeating yourself too much. And when I
Yeah.
hear these tunes that are spanned over about 13 and a half, 14 years, I can hear my brain working through it. So I'm taking an idea. If I have an idea, it's not like I write one tune and then abandon it and start from
Mm-hmm.
scratch. It's more like I take an idea and then express it and then look back and figure out, okay, that worked, but that didn't work, and then modify it. Take that idea
Mm-hmm.
and expand upon it
Mm-hmm.
so that the tunes in a trajectory feel like they're part of, I don't know, they hang together in some ways.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
The sound,
red line or something. Yeah, yeah. Good.
yeah, connecting line. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't want to sound
common thread.
pretentious.
Yeah, yeah,
A common thread, that's a good way to
yeah,
put it.
yeah,
Right? So there's something that ties them together. They have a sound that feels cohesive, but at the same time, they're never the same. Like, I don't want to write the same tune again.
yeah,
If I've done something, I did that, and now I need to change it.
yeah,
And you have to be, you have to be conscious of that and not lazy about it. You have to work at it. It's
yeah,
not, sometimes it's a painful process, honestly, because you have to reevaluate your own work and say, all right, this really worked for me, but this is, I could see how that, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but now in retrospect,
yeah,
so, being honest and moving it forward and just seeing where you get.
yeah.
And
That's
that's
good.
it.
Yeah, but like you own now those records you did on Palmetto. Like, but I wanted to ask you this before already. Like, why did you decide to? I mean, so many musicians nowadays do that. Like, including me, and like that you kind of do it on your own, right? You did that like sonic camera like years ago, like 8 years ago,
Yeah.
or even longer.
Yeah.
No, yeah. Where did this decision come from, and what do you think are nowadays the advantages or disadvantages of doing this? Like from your standpoint, your experience, I would like to hear that.
Yeah, I think this is important because I think a lot of musicians, well, every musician of every generation has confronted this, right? I mean, record labels, what they do is, which is so important, is that they provide a framework for artists to do what they do. Not just a framework, but like the finances
Yeah.
and the wherewithal and the knowledge about how to produce, um, create, package, and
Hmm.
then disseminate and sell and generate interest
Yeah.
on a piece of music. And that's not nothing. That's the music industry, so that's like
Yeah.
super important. I mean, it's
Sure.
super important. But artists from time immemorial have often felt that during that process somehow part of their vision or what they want to do gets lost in
Lost. Yeah.
translation.
Definitely. Yeah.
Sometimes artists honestly have been horrendously taken advantage of, and this now may be a good time to tell the story of Andrew Hill and my experiences talking with him about this, because he struggled with this. And I know we talked a lot, and he expressed to me on several occasions how frustrated he was with his experience with Blue Note, and how he, he created, in the 60s, early mid 60s, he created, I think 5 of the most seminal jazz albums.
Yeah, those are incredible. Yeah.
All within like a I don't know how many months, less than a year.
Yeah.
I mean, those records were made within months of each other.
I didn't know that. Seriously.
Look at the recording dates. It's an astounding explosion of creativity that happened in a very short amount of time. So here's an artist who just had all these incredible ideas, and just, it was great that Blue Note recognized that and gave him the opportunity to capture them, and they're amazing records, and they were all done in a short amount of time. However, on the business side of things, I think it wasn't as good for him as it might have been. And so here I was having conversations with him in the 90s about this, and how he had been struggling with for 30 years to kind of regain some control over this music, which he was not able to do based on the contracts that he signed. So what he told me was, I had been offered a record contract. It was my first record as a leader. I was in my early 20s, and he said, "Don't sign it." He said, "Don't make a record with somebody else." And I was like, "Well, I mean, what else am I supposed to do? Like, I want to get a record out. Like, how do you, He's like, "Oh," and then he said, "But always own your music." So it was, but that is so important, because I knew that I needed help. I couldn't do it on my own. This is pre-digital era, so musicians were dependent upon labels to kind of produce, create, manufacture, and distribute. The distribution side of this is huge. Distribute albums, because they couldn't do it themselves. I mean, you could make your own thing and sell it on gigs, but if you wanted to get it out to a larger audience, you needed this machinery, and the record labels and the distributors controlled that machinery. So his advice was not to sign up with a record label, and I knew that I had to at the time. But the piece of good advice that he gave me that I took to heart was to make sure that I owned it. So when I went in for my first record contract, I had a bunch of bargaining chips, things that I wanted to get, but I had a list of things that I would trade away, and then some things that I would not, that I did not want to trade away. And the two most important things that I would not trade away were rights to the recordings and rights to the tunes. And everything else were bargaining chips that I could, if they pushed back on, I would say okay as a concession. But those are the things that I think most musicians care about most, is the music that you create, the song, and the recording of that song. Those are the two most kind of important things.
Yeah.
And I don't know. So that's something that I picked up from Andrew and took to heart, and went into those discussions thinking very seriously about. And so years later, this feels almost like common knowledge to musicians, but at the time I think musicians weren't always thinking about this. At least people that I knew weren't.
But I think even nowadays, like younger musicians would be like.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I mean, I think younger musicians are, first of all, way, way, way more sophisticated than we were, than I was at my generation.
No, definitely. I agree. For me,
but I think that we learned something from the people that came before. So I learned something from Andrew Hill, and I think maybe the younger generation has learned stuff from people like me about things.
How to do it,
Yeah, how to do it. That's right. So that's the backstory of how creating your own label works, right? You want to have a certain amount of control over it. You want to own it.
Yeah.
The downside, of course, is that nobody's financing it, and that's the big difference.
Yeah. But how did you manage, like, through the years, if you, like, take, if you, like, cut through it, like, are you satisfied the way it works, or it worked in a way?
You mean in terms of,
I mean, like,
in terms of what?
but maybe not even in terms of, let's say, finances, but I mean, like doing the records as a band leader, it's always like, you know, but like especially in terms of distribution and I think this networking problem sometimes, how to reach out to people and to magazines. I mean, how do you deal with that, or how did you deal with that to get the record out there? I mean, digital-wise, it's okay, but like especially.
Yeah. You mean in terms of how musicians today,
Yeah.
who are independent musicians, get their music out? And
how to, let's say you have a really good record, because, you know, I spoke to even to my students or someone, like, let's say you make like a really good record, right? And
yeah.
then how do you, I mean, according to your experience, how do you get it out there to that reviewers listen to it, or how do you create a network, like, according to you? I mean, like.
Yeah. And this is such a good question, because everything that I've said up until this point, I think the implication is that musicians are better served if they do it themselves, or if they maintain control. And actually, that may not be the case, because doing what you just described is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And I think for many artists, you know, honestly, they just want to play and make music and leave it to the other people to do all that sort of stuff. So I think if I were to classify my career in 3 sections, I would think the first period was a certain naivete about how things worked, followed by a period where I was very much concerned with what I was just talking about, which was kind of ownership and control over your ultimate art. I've entered the third phase, which is somewhere in between.
Oh.
So I very much struggle with, like, I got all these records. I have 10 records now, and I honestly, between you and me and whoever watches this video, I'm struggling with figuring out how to do that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to. I think most artists don't want to just release a record into the ethos and then just have it the ether rather, and then just have it disappear. I mean, you don't want to create something. You pour your heart and soul into this music, and you want people to hear it, but at the same time, you know, that there are mechanics to getting your music out there, which is involves a lot of work, like the marketing side of things. And I don't know. I mean, maybe there's like 2 or 3 artists who love self-promoting, but most of us feel ambivalent about it, or not sure about it. Well, how do I, you know, I love my music. I want people to hear it, but I don't want to be like self-serving or like, you know, check out my awesome shit. You got to check it out. So we struggle with this to a certain extent. That's a dilemma for many artists, and I'm struggling with it myself. So I don't have a solution to this.
Okay.
If you're waiting for like the big reveal.
Yeah, I was like, damn. Okay.
I don't have it. I'm not that wise. I'm a idiot like the rest of us. But I will say that you know, there's something satisfying about putting stuff out that you know, in the way that you want.
It is,
That is almost a selfish feeling. Like when I put out a record, I'm putting it out now exactly like I want it, which feels selfish. It's kind of like this is what I think, and I'm hoping that people dig it. Yeah. But the counter to that is it's hard to talk about one's art in a way to engage people. So that's the struggle. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
No.
What do you think, Samo?
I don't know. It's like for me, it's like, you know, I love doing this. I mean, even in this lockdown periods, I've done so many projects. You know, I've learned years ago to do the mixing and mastering. You know, like just to minimize the costs in all fronts. And you know, the designer friends do it like for really the lowest possible fees. Like I know it's like and stuff like that. But then the problem is, like, let's say you make a good record, you're satisfied with it musically and artistically as a product, as a cover and everything. But then I always, you know, this struggle of how to reach out to more people. How do you do that? You know, I really suck. Maybe I belong to this generation that's kind of in between this knowing how to use Facebook and Instagram and all this media that the younger generation than me does way better. You know, how do you reach out with a good record out to people? That's, I'm still, you know, sometimes I check out some records that get like really, you know what I will mean, like really good reviews, and they're featured everywhere, but they're like, to my opinion, like, meh, okay.
Yeah.
Overrated or nothing fresh or interesting, or, and then I'm like, you know, maybe a record that we did with musicians, you did like something really good in your own opinion, something fresh, something, I don't know, with a heart, but you cannot reach the people to get it, you know, and that's for me the struggle the last 5 years, let's say.
Yeah, well, you're 5 years into a 100-year struggle.
Yeah, I know. The last 10 years, you know. Like.
Yeah, no. Even you've just summed up like the big question for art.
Yeah, exactly. In general, yeah.
Quality versus what people, how they get it, and if they get it.
Yeah.
And there's a huge disconnect. There always has been.
Yeah.
I know this may sound too absolute, but it's almost like the music that you are most likely to hear almost all the time may not be the best or the stuff that you like the most.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a disconnect with what you hear, is easy to find and what's most accessible, versus the stuff that actually in the end you would prefer the most.
Yeah.
Huge disconnect, you know. So it's often the case that for people who are music enthusiasts, if you talk to most music enthusiasts, people that look to music as something that they really want to delve into and explore, it's always a process of searching and finding. Yeah,
okay.
You know, I'm like, when it comes to fashion, I'm a fashion moron. I mean, I don't know anything about it. I honestly have to admit that it's not my thing. Mostly just, I appreciate people who love it the way I love music, but it's not something I know anything about or care to put any time and effort into. So if thegap.com sends me a coupon for 25% off, I'll probably just do it.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry, but
sure.
You know what I'm saying? Like I don't care, so that's easy for me.
Yeah.
When it comes to music, I really, really, really do care. So I will be scouring record bins for stuff.
Yeah, I'm the same. Yeah.
You know, because I'm that kind of dork and about music, and I love it so much that I'm willing to put the time and effort in.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the thing. It's like there's a wide audience out there, and everybody's kind of got their own thing, what they're interested in.
Yeah.
And that's just the way the world works.
Now, you know, just this popped up in my mind. One problem that I have, it's like, it's a problem. Like, okay, you minimize the costs for creating the album, let's say, or a product, right? Like, you know, like the production costs, the recording, the mastering, everything kind of to keep it still, to make it the best possible product. But, and then when the post-production, when you have the product, then that's for me always the question, you know, do you spend then like a couple of thousands of dollars or euros for magazines to pay them back, basically for the, you know, for the adverts and all that, to get then reviews and stuff like that. And then I'm like always like on a scale, you know, I would rather pay the designer more because he's an artist in a way, you know, and then to pay, I don't know, someone to write a review, basically, you know, so it's, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, that speaks to something much larger, which is how we value, as a society, differing professions, and what's important to us.
Yeah, especially in this.
Now we got to clear out like a whole other hour to talk about that.
Yeah. But I just want to go to a different sphere, just like to ask you some questions about your beginning, if you're still willing to answer some questions. I'm really interested in, who, if you remember, like the first jazz record and concerts kind of that blew your mind? Like you mentioned, like the 80s, you watched Ron Carter. Like, you remember like some of the first people that you saw or records that you put on, and you were like, "Damn, what the fuck is this?" Or you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about this last year. Somebody asked me a similar question, and I thought back. Actually, the first thing that I can remember that put me on this path was when I was in school, in primary school, in fourth grade, which is, I think you were at that point about 8 or 9 years old in America. There were two musicians who came into my music class. The music teacher had invited two musicians in from the New Haven scene, Willie Ruff and Dwight Mitchell. So these are musicians who are local celebrities, but they may not be so well known outside of that scene. They're an interesting duo. They were the first, according to legend, the first, one among the first jazz musicians to ever to perform in China.
Oh, wow.
So it's interesting. But they came in, bass and piano, played a duo set of half an hour in length. I had never heard anything like it, and my memory of it is very distinct. They would play a tune or so, and then at one point, they both looked at each other quickly and kind of laughed a little bit. And then a few moments later, they both looked at each other again and started really laughing, like out loud. Now, to me, what was the mystery about this was I was under the assumption, having listened as a child mostly to rock records or records, you know, which was recorded music, where you knew what was going to happen next. Or my mom was very involved and still is in choral music, so I listened to a lot of choral. I was in a youth choir, choral music where it's written out, so you know what's coming next. There's no mystery to it. And but they were laughing, and I couldn't quite understand the joke until it occurred to me that I thought that they were surprising each other.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And that's what they were reacting to. In the same way that if you have a conversation and somebody says something and the other person says something and then they laugh because it's kind of the same thing. Yeah. I realized that's cool. what was happening, and that's where the light bulb went off, because I didn't know that you could surprise someone else with music.
So then you found out that this is basically jazz, or that...
Well, I didn't know what to call it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was called, or I didn't know what that meant. Yeah. But it was almost like, if I could use a metaphor, it was like a candle flame in the woods through the trees from 500 feet away, and I saw the flame.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
And then I was like, wait, what's that?
Yeah, that's quite cool.
And so the next, 37 years of my life, I've tried to figure out what that is. It's like walking towards that flame and like, wait, what is that? I don't get it. And trying to figure it out and try to understand it.
Yeah.
It's a mystery. It's fascinating. It's the kind of thing that one could devote their lives to. And I have. I think we all have, right?
I think so.
What is that? How does that work?
Yeah, it's like before. How does that work? I just want to finish this talk with just one probably, I don't know, atypical for jazz, but like, I'm a poetry geek. Like I studied poetry and I did my PhD in American poetry and everything in translation. And I saw that you collaborated with Robert Pinsky. Like I didn't know that.
You did.
Yeah, I've read that last week and I was like, what? And I really wanted to ask you that, because just how did this happen, and how was that like for you to be involved with spoken word, with poetry in this case? I mean, since I'm a Pinsky fan as well, so it's like,
Good. Yeah, Robert's awesome. Also, did you know that my sister-in-law is Tracy K. Smith, who's a well-known poet in the U.S.?
Oh, really? Okay, I have to check this out.
She's U.S. Poet Laureate, and
really?
And won the Pulitzer for her last book. So she's a great poet.
Oh, I have to check her out. Okay.
Yeah, she's great. This is so, like, for me, spoken word is, I became a jazz musician because words were inadequate. That was part of it.
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't put it into words. But as I got older, I started to relate to it more. And I got into the idea of words and the melody of words in connection with spoken word, and then of course poetry, that's what poetry is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
There's written poetry, but then there's performance poetry. There's poetry that's performed, and the performative aspect is what I find the most interesting. And I connected with Robert through an organization actually in New Haven, my hometown, called the International Festival of Arts and Ideas.
Oh, wow.
And it's an ongoing kind of artistic explosion that normally happens in the summer. And they paired me with Robert for a concert at a hall in New Haven, just as a kind of like the producer thought this might be cool, let's try it.
As a duo?
As a duo. And we got together.
Wow.
Yeah, no, we got together literally, an hour before we were supposed to perform together.
Oh,
and I had done some research, of course, to read his poems, and he created something called the Favorite Poems Project, which I remember growing up was something they played on public television, where an average person would read their favorite poem. So he had been a long-time promoter of poetry and reading poetry out loud, but I had never really felt any connection to that until we met, and we were forced to create something in the moment that was performative and connected.
Yeah, beautiful.
The words that he's speaking in a rhythmic and melodic way that I could relate to.
Yeah.
And it started a collaboration that was really, really cool, and for me, I learned a lot.
Yeah.
So again, it was a random thing, but it turned into something kind of interesting.